I'm back with another Questing Musings video. I know it's been quite a while, and I did say that I wanted to make one within the month of October. So here it is. And basically, it's it's not going to be a very heavy topic today. I hope so. At least it won't be long. But I just wanted to sort of reflect on how I pick role playing games, how I choose role playing games. Maybe one day I'll really talk about why I play role playing games, or maybe I already have talked a little bit about that, or maybe not in depth. But just to jump the gun a little bit, I think, and the reason why I wanted to talk about how I pick role playing games is because of as if you've been following my channel, you know that I'm currently doing a quick starter project or series of videos where I try to learn a new quick start game and run it, and then share my experience with it on camera and talk about it, and learn a few things along the way, and also experience new things along the way. So I guess this video is really just to really share my process of what are the factors or what are the influences that makes me choose the game that I want to play, and what made me interested in them. And I think this might be, maybe it's useful for I don't know, for designers who are looking for a player's input or gamers input on how on what our thought processes is. But I think it's mostly more helpful for me, and also for other people who game with me, to understand what are the things that usually attract me towards a game. And if I decide to play it or run it, uh, these are generally the things that I emphasize on, maybe, or I hold highly towards the game, or have different expectations about the game from these angles, so that I get to know myself a little bit better, and hopefully you get to know me a little bit better about my gaming preferences and taste. So generally just boils down to, for now, the things, just giving it some thought, I think it generally just boils down to six things that of what I look for in a game. And therefore there are definitely there are probably some nuances to each thing, that I'll probably discuss in the rest of the video. But I think, six is a pretty large amount of, big amount if you think about it, because there's, like, do I need all six things to be, to tickle my fancy, to really say that I'm on board on the game? Not necessarily. I don't think so. I think I just need to hit a few of these check boxes for me to really say that, okay, I'll be interested to give the game even a try, and dedicate a certain amount of time and willpower to actually even go through with it. So I think we'll just start with the first thing. I think the first most basic thing, for me, is genre, and that's actually very strange coming from me, because uh, I'm someone who basically grew up with Dungeons and Dragons. I've never really branched out from the fantasy genre in terms of role playing games, uh, and I think that might have a unexpected consequence, in the sense that, although I love fantasy and I still continue to love fantasy even to up to this day, and I still think a lot about fantasy related things. I think it also has caused a certain amount of burnout, and also maybe a certain amount of jadedness, that when it comes to a genre that I hold dear to, but may not necessarily have a vast amount of knowledge about. So because, like, at some point, the dragon just is just a dragon, and you lose the sense of awe, you lose the sense of amazement, when your character is meeting a dragon for the first time, because we when all you think about is dragons, then you maybe get a little technical about it, or maybe you think you sort of understand them in a way that, there's nothing special about them anymore. So I think, so having said that, I've this I've decided to really sort of branch out, and it's not to say that my consumption of other mediums or other media is always been tied to fantasy. In fact, I think there is actually there's probably a lower amount of exemplary mediums for the fantasy genre in general, compared to the vast amounts of material that's out there for other genres. So naturally, some of the other genres that I'm like keeping my eye out would be sci-fi, which is sometimes considered the like the opposite of of fantasy, even though technically they are probably the same thing. And sci-fi is actually one area that there's obviously huge amounts of material in terms of different stories and mediums being told in the sci-fi genre. And I've actually and so far all the games that I have ran for my Quickstarter project has included sci-fi in the mix. In fact, I'll probably be running my second sci-fi game out of the games that I've run so far this year for my next quick start. So sci-fi and sci-fi being it's so vast, such a vast and broad genre, there can be lots of divisions between the sci-fi genre in itself. That yeah, there's a whole broad spectrum to be really explored, and as probably as broad as fantasy in general. So and another genre that holds my special interest is the cyberpunk. The cyberpunk genre, I think I owe a lot of that to my maybe you could say obsession with the Ghost in the Shell TV series, not necessarily the movies, but the TV series really painted my perception about the cyberpunk genre as a base, as in general. But I've been trying to try to really get a bit deeper into the history of the cyberpunk genre. Some classics here and there that I probably should try to get into. And there's a whole, even in the RPG space itself, cyberpunk is definitely one of the more relatively explored space or genre, since the early days of RPGs as a whole. So, and there's definitely many ways, and there's many sort of issues related within the cyberpunk genre space. So I think that's one. This is an interesting genre in itself that can explore the same things but through various lenses, and that's fascinating for me as how that gets translated into a role playing game. Then you could say another genre that is sort of like the fringe or peripheral or tangential genre with a fantasy. It would be the pulp fiction. I have to admit though, the pulp fiction that most probably people understand it comes from a more Western American tradition, and maybe by saying pulp, I am leaning towards that particular leaning of what defines as pulp. But I'm not. I don't think I'm against any more Asian inspired traditions of pulp. Now, I'm not exactly. I don't really think I can give a good example of that. You could maybe say to a smaller extent it may refer to the Hayao Miyazaki movies, but I think pulp has an interesting taste to me, because it's more about the adventure, so to speak. I think less there's this sense of adventure that is maybe less dangerous, or maybe even more dangerous, but there's this romantic or romanticism with the adventuring part that I think is an interesting pull, and I think it's something that RPGs should be able to emulate, or at least even inspire relatively well if done properly. And therefore I definitely like to explore more pulpy genre RPGs at some point. I don't think I have found an actual good one that I can start with. I mean, if you have any, you can definitely recommend them in the comments. May and to a certain extent, some of these pulpy tones or ideas do seep into the fantasy once in a while. So I guess that's probably where I want to take the direction towards. But I'm definitely think that there is some fun in pulp that probably you can't really get from other genres. Who knows? Then there's another genre that's I find it very fascinating to me because of the challenge of running them and maybe even playing them to a certain extent, which is horror. And I certainly think there are some big name horror RPGs out there. I probably would want to try them at some point. And for me, I think it's not so much of the atmosphere or the fear that seeps or that permeates around the horror genre. I think it's more of a technical challenge, like how do you actually run a effective horror game or immerse yourself in a horror environment to not be scared, because RPGs, as you know, that sustaining that illusion of that illusional reality can somewhat be easily broken at times, especially when fear has already come into the picture as a player or as GM. And you just want to break that imagination space, just so that you can escape yourself from fear. So I think it takes a certain amount of subtlety and finesse in doing the horror genre right. So that's and I'm definitely interested in exploring more horror games. Call of Cthulhu is obviously somewhere in my backlog that I will want to run at some point. But there's definitely way more horror genre games out there. That doesn't have to be tied to just one particular game. And falling in between my fascination with fantasy and also my willing attempt to try more sci-fi would be the modern setting. And I definitely have a very niche taste towards the modern setting. Because there's a whole involvement of guns, maybe some tactical shooting, and some more, you could say, more clever ways of playing role-playing games. I don't think I necessarily fit well into any mashup of whether fantasy or sci-fi in a modern setting. I think I'm more interested in exploring the modern setting for what it is or what it has provided. So this may typically be falling into your espionage games. I have a special fondness for special operations game. Games. Maybe it may sound more war gamey or more board gamey, but I do like to see an RPG that can successfully emulate a very strong sense of special operations tactical play in an RPG form rather than in a more physical or visual form of play. And for me, probably the last genre that I also find that I also appreciate the technical challenge that it provides is the mystery. So sometimes there's probably a lot of tangential areas where horror and mystery fall with each other, but I think there's a different set of skills of designing a mystery, not so much of running it, but designing a mystery compared to running a horror game. So, and I'm not there probably is a lot of games that I can think of that falls within the mystery genre in itself. Don't but can't really say I run any of them. But it definitely would be interesting to learn a few things from the mystery genre and running history mystery games. But yeah, that's something that I look forward to learn, and I definitely won't say I'm a well-read reader of mystery novels in general, or even as other mediums as a whole. But it's still a very fascinating genre for me to see how it's done. So besides genre, and that may usually be my starting point. Like, I want to know the genre of the game first before I ask any more questions about what any more questions about the game to learn more. But I think, and I guess, one main thing that ties importantly to the genre is, especially if it's a non-modern game, I think it's even more so. It's even more important. Next question is even more important, especially if it's for the fantasy or sci-fi, or maybe even to the extent of some of the cyberpunk and pulp eras games, would be the setting. I think I'm quite a sucker for good world building, worlds that have very rich lore and even well designed ones, even that doesn't necessarily have to have really really strong depth. But I think uh, if a setting provides with some interesting amounts of premises of what you can do in this world, I think that also naturally draws my attention to really ask some questions about, like, I can, like, questions that the setting ask. And I definitely want to try to let it run through the role-playing rigor and see what kind of answers do we get out of it. So setting doesn't necessarily have to be, it can be the original setting, a setting made especially for the role playing game. Uh, but I also tend to be another sucker for settings from licensed properties. It could be from like Dragon Age or the various worlds of Dungeons and Dragons, from Witcher, because the licensed properties usually tend to be the gateway for me to enter into that world, to really know it inside and out. And the opportunities provided from the licensed properties are usually the one that makes me think like, hey, this would actually make a good RPG game, or what would an RPG game set in this exact setting look like. And I think because I pay attention, or at least I ask those questions when it comes to licensed properties and their connection with RPGs. That is why I try to spread a really wide net in terms of what I consume, and it can come from just television series, anime, comics, manga, novels, movies, and I would use, and what, by watching, by consuming them, you and trying and always asking yourself the question of what would this look like in a role playing game is something that really just uh, inspires me almost every day and every time I consume all this kind of media. So that forms like the basis of the setting of whatever the system is. And I think if I have a good attraction towards a setting, and also knowing where that setting is set in terms of genre, then that would definitely be that would definitely be the the surface attractions that really say, okay, let's take a deeper look into what are the opportunities or what are the interesting things that's going on with this as a game. And I guess my next point, my third point here, my third attraction is can be sort of tied with the genre, but I think it deserves to be a bit distinct by itself, is the theme and tones of the game. Now, themes are basically, uh, for me, the themes of a game are basically what the game is about. It can be set in a dystopian future, with a particular setting, license or not. But it's the deeper questions of, by using this as a premise, what is the game trying to convey, or what is the game trying to emulate, or what is the game trying to uh, portray even. Yeah, so I just seeing the surface and all that doesn't necessarily inform me. I need that game to be able to tell me what is this game about essentially, down to the bottom line. And whether that, and whatever answer that game gives, or whatever get answer that game suggests, is also one element that I feel that, okay, I would be more interested to explore even deeper, if the game is solid enough to give me a relatively satisfying answer. And by having an answer to what this game is about, I think the next stage, or the next phase that answers this question is, why do we play it? Why do we need to use the medium of role playing games to tackle this theme? Is there a particular significance in the way of us using mechanics to explore these themes? Are we supposed to produce an expected result, or maybe an even unexpected result when we mash themes and mechanics together? And I think one important thing about knowing the theme of a game is pretty important. It's not just a reason why I want to play it, but it's also pretty important to understand, because by knowing the themes of the game set in and with its mechanics, you know, it gives you a little bit of a roadmap of where the mechanics are going towards, and that actually helps a lot when you are starting to run the game, or even playing the game maybe, to make certain calls that you know may be considered genre appropriate, or at least game appropriate. Like that there are certain aspects, or there are certain reactions or decisions that you make in that game by using the mechanics of that game. It's supposed to fit towards the theme, or at least answers towards the theme. So yeah, that's so I guess, you know, when you have genre mixed with setting and theme, I guess this forms like a very foundational basis of what the game really is about. And by by digging deeper, that's, I think that gives a lot of a relatively, you know, strong meaning of why do we even play in the first place. Why do we, not only just why do we play the game, but why do we play role-playing games in general. uh, and coming off together with themes, I think another element that usually is latched on to themes is tone. And you know, we can have like a and I guess the more simplified or general way to really say up to, for my definition of tone, is basically the grittiness, uh, and maybe even the maturity level. Like it could be a light horror game, or is it like a dark, serious, gritty mystery game or fantasy game. And it, like in general, like even just talking about fantasy games, like you can have the really simple light-hearted fantasy games. You can also have the dark grimy fantasy games. So I guess, uh, you know, and that ties somewhat with the theme, in the sense that are the questions being asked by the game some really really dark and serious questions, or are these something more like, you know, just a more detached or more casual or more cheery sort of questions, like what would you do if you ran an inn, kind of RPG or something like that. So I guess in a way the tone puts a shade onto the themes, like how serious are we supposed to take the question, how serious are we supposed to approach or address the themes of the game. And even, I mean, just having a different tone sort of just, you know, it becomes two spectrums, and therefore there's so many games that can slot in between, even if they answer the same, even if they are going for the same themes. uh, and by understanding theme and tone, I think for me, like as I tried to as I said, maybe I've said it earlier, is that it basically shows me the intent and design of the game, like what is this game made to do. And I think that's a very fascinating from studying it from a design perspective, of saying how, what are the themes of this game, how does it portray it through its setting and genre, and how do they use the mechanics to sort of work with that, or interact with, and maybe how, and by once you learn how all the pieces fit together, or whether they don't fit together as well as you think they are, I think there's that the learning, the lesson that comes from it from a design perspective is actually quite fascinating to me as well. And it's maybe something I don't know if we see often enough, or maybe it's something that maybe it's an area of study of RPGs that I want to explore if I get the chance to, and hopefully, you know, helps inform any of my own design ideas if I have from the future. Who knows? Okay, so the fourth thing that attracts me is, I think comes naturally, for someone who plays, you know, if for someone who has played different types of RPGs, it's definitely the mechanics. And these are basically the rules, the way that things are done in the game, and how are they governed by a certain set of certain set parameters or guidelines. And for me, there are a few ways I look at rules. Number one is definitely the complexity of the rules. Are we going for something that is easy to understand, or you know, is pushing something pushing towards something that is more light-hearted, but at the same time maybe simple to execute, or is it more of a procedural or something that has a long process to resolve in a way? And I guess if you look at the different types of games and the different type of mechanics that perform a conflict resolution or task resolution, I guess that's kind of where you see the differences in terms of complexity. And coming up to that is also the question of depth. That's of is how much depth does the mechanic have? Uh, and depth, I think depth for me could be more, or maybe better imagined as a abstract or highly simulative game. And maybe that's the way I'm looking at it right now. That if the game leans towards having many steps, and each step is trying to simulate or randomize particular aspect of whatever the task you're doing, I think that has more depth compared to a game that says just roll a d20 and add your modifier and see if it hits regardless of whatever the armor the person is wearing. I think that the depth is much more shallow in that sense. This is not in any way trying to say that one is better than the other, but by looking at the game and looking at how much depth it goes into, like if I were playing a light-hearted game, or at least a game that portrays itself to be light-hearted or lighter in tone, but has a very deep set of mechanics, that I would be able to see like, oh, okay, this doesn't seem to line up properly, or at least it doesn't feel right to me when you compare one aspect of the mechanics of the game with the thematic concerns of the game. So that's also definitely something that I'm interested in looking at in terms of like how does the mechanics look like in comparison with the more fluffier stuff. Options is definitely another aspect of the game that I may or may not appreciate depending on the game. And naturally, if the game sometimes a game may not necessarily have be very deep, but have many options. One could, I guess a simple way to demonstrate this is if you look at Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition compared with Pathfinder 2, they are relatively similar in terms of their depth, like in terms of their racial and class design, but at the same time, Pathfinder 2 has a way more options in terms of at the same level of depth for class and race. And that may or may not be a good thing sometimes. Having options sometimes is good when you want variety, but sometimes having too much variety can also be causing analysis paralysis. So sometimes it's just interesting to see how game like I said, if a game that has not much depth or maybe even less complexity but has a wide variety of options may be more interesting than a game that already has a long list of complexity and depth but has very few options, which may sound counterintuitive. And I think overall, as a package of the mechanics, I think for me at least, and I think this is something that I'm still looking for in other games, is how does team inform mechanics and vice versa. And sometimes it may feel that it's mostly a disconnect between mechanics and team, but I think this is more stronger if the game itself has a very particularly strong voice, strong themes, strong genre, and therefore they develop mechanics that's suited to it. And sometimes you see a lot of games that they have they claim themselves to be for a particular genre, but when you look at the mechanics they provide, it may not be in sync with their themes or genre as well. So that's it's just interesting to see how things are done. How different games do different things, or sometimes even the same thing but in different ways. Okay, the fifth thing that drives my decision to play a game is support. It's support for the game. And may not, I'm not necessarily talking about what comes after the game. Like sometimes when you have a particular, when you have a core book, core rule book, and then does the company, does the publisher continue to make products related to the core rule book to supplement the core rule book, to provide more information, to provide more stuff for the player, the GM, to get to use, to utilize the core rulebook even more. Sometimes I'm just, what I'm talking about is the tools that is provided in the core rulebook. Sometimes in general, like they are the rules, but what are the tools being given to the GM to use those to make stuff up that utilizes the rules in a meaningful way, or sometimes even how giving the designer tools or the editor's kit to the GM to create stuff that will be fun with the mechanics. So and there are definitely like different levels of tools. Like there are tools for creating campaigns, there are tools for creating encounters, there are maybe tools for creating monsters or challenges. uh, I think the I think sometimes it's an overlooked aspect when it comes to designing games, that we maybe designers are very strongly focused on making a good set of solid rules to play with, but they do not necessarily give uh, 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 GMs a peek under the hood to see how the whole machine works. So, if a game that is that has great mechanics but has poor support tools, is probably something that really won't make me be interested in running it as much. And I don't like, and I definitely, and personally speaking, I don't like running games that uh, sort of throws the GM out there and say you go figure it out. It wastes a lot of time studying the rules. It may waste a lot of sessions even for the players while the GM is trying to figure out how to do it properly, and it can be a very frustrating experience. So I think there has to be a level of GM support in a way, with the in terms of tools, with the rules that's already been provided to the players. Uh, but that's not to say that that's the only thing I look for in terms of support. Lore is definitely another aspect. Like if you've created a very interesting, a fascinating setting, then definitely try to supply GMs with lore about it, so that the GM has more material to work with, create their own things out of the supplement. And at some point, if the GM runs a game using the same setting or using the same rules after extended period of time, things will get stale, things will get boring, and there's nothing else left to do. So I think just by dropping a few lore ideas into a setting, or just keep on adding it to the lore library or to the canon, that sustains the interest, and that sustains the fascination, or amazement, like the sense of exploration. Like, I want to know more about this world. And this definitely worked with me in terms of my in terms of Dungeons and Dragons, because I'm still to this day still fascinated by the Forgotten Realms. When I was first introduced to it when I was like 10 years old, and I'm still learning about the realms till today. And there's so many things to learn about the realms, and the realms, and lore is definitely one factor that kept me looking, kept me interested in it for so long. uh, and besides the lore, and obviously the tools, besides the tools that I mentioned, I think another important thing about support is that is general advice, or general ideas, or general inspiration to keep the creative juices running. It's not just and it's not just important for the DMs to be given the right tools to work with, but also having a constant source of inspiration to say, this is what you can do with the tools, here's some general idea you can do with the tools, have you ever thought about using the tools to do this, or something like that. I guess that's a different kind of support, but that can come from the lore in some sense. But I think there can be there can be some more technical ways of providing inspiration to want to keep playing a particular game. So I think that's also very interesting, and that's also kind of important to me in terms of looking at the support that the game is given. And lastly, I think, and this is probably something I may be a bit more particular about, but maybe for some others, it's something that we easily overlook or we don't really think is as important as as it should be, is formatting and layout. You know, you can have the best setting, you can have the best set in the best genre, in the most interesting genre, have the best rules, have the best support, have the best lore, but if presentation really matters. Presentation of the book, presentation of your information, of where your lore or whatever really matters. And especially if you're coming in a physical book form, I think there should be as much thought put into how you organize the parts together than just creating the parts in themselves. Because you know, if if there is bad formatting or there is bad layout, it not only causes you know, an ugly presentation, but it can be unfriendly to for someone who is using the book. And I think one general principle that sometimes I that I may have a controversial or unpopular opinion on is that books are nice, but I think publishers should understand there is a difference between a game book, a game that's meant for use, and a book in general that's meant for reading. I think there are two different design approaches in terms of creating a game book for use and a book for reading. We can have, you know, the usual organization of chapters, but I think there has to be a little bit more thought put into how you tie in how reading a particular section makes it easier for a reader, or in this case a gamer, to find related information to that particular section. It can be lore, it can be mechanics, it can be just explanation of rules of any kind. And I think, you know, all this all this good organization, or all this thought process of how to relate points to one another has to come from, you know, basic strong fundamental grasp of book layouts and organization of information. And that's probably, you know, that's I think that's a job or an aspect of creating an RPG game that has to be as respected as, you know, those who create the actual game. And you know, probably even deserves like a really specialized person to know how to create a product that's condensed and organized well enough to, you know, make it a friendly device or interface for the gamer to really get what the designers are going for. And yeah, it's probably a very minor thing for most, but for me, I think it's an aspect of game design that I sort of kind of pay attention to, maybe a bit too much. But I think if a game is, you know, well put together, it may not necessarily have the best thing going for it in terms of the other aspects that I mentioned of, I think I'll probably be more friendlier to that game than, you know, than in reverse. So yeah, so I guess that's generally the six things as I've already talked about, that really attracts me. And as I said, the game doesn't necessarily have to hit all the 6 points that I want to. I mean, but I guess I assess a game by the six things, and sometimes I will never get to know things about a game until I really, like, you know, really crack it up open and really start looking into the parts. And that's probably too late for me to back out and say I don't want to run this game anymore, or not even try to even run the game, you know, because I still believe that even after you've picked up the game and you've you know, you've studied it a little bit, that I guess by that point I will probably still give it a spin and say, let's just see how it works when it comes to the table and to the players, and let's see if it really matters. So I guess, you know, having me listing all these things down, I guess it informs it. I guess it's a good way how it informs my decision. And I guess if I do recommend a game, especially my Quickstarter series, or games that further, in the future, or if I really go into studying a whole game by itself, I'm most likely going to study them from these six angles, and what they mean to me, uh, you know, and I guess that's pretty much about it. That's how I pick games, and the games that I've picked so far, I might have explained the reasons why I picked them at some point, and they all one point or another is probably be able to slot in one of these six areas where I'm looking at in the game. So yeah, so I guess the interesting thing is, have you really thought about why you pick the game? And I guess one important reason why I look at these six areas to pick a game is that I want to get my money's worth when I'm buying and buying into a game, when I'm getting into a game. These are like the six red flags that I'm looking for, and if there are none, then I'll say, okay, that's probably worth going into. Or if there are a few, and I'll see if they are tolerable and compromisable to get into, and if I'm willing to put in that amount of work. uh, so yeah, so how about you? Have you really thought about what are the things that you're looking for in the game? And maybe by understanding your own preferences and your own taste, it may sort of influence the way you play, or the reason of why we play. So I I may do another question musings video related to this topic somewhat, or maybe, like I said, why I play RPGs in the first place. Maybe there are definitely some interesting topics that can branch out from this video, but haven't really thought of which ones that I want to crystallize them into a video. But we'll see. So I guess this is the question GM signing out for now, and yeah, share your thoughts. Bye.